I'll call this meeting to order. Can we please have a roll call attendance vote? Madam Secretary.
Okay, Commissioner Foister. Bliss. Here. Nelson. Here. Petroselli.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here. And Pam is on Zoom. Pam, you're on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, she is. Oh, okay.
Pam's on Zoom.
On Zoom. Got her. And the chairperson, of course, is here.
I'm here, thank you.
Okay.
Looks like it's a work session. I'm glad we haven't had a meeting and then we're able to work on this stuff to move it forward. Tonight's a discussion regarding updates to the land use regulations, parking standards, and accessory dwelling units. And we have TJ and Max here to walk us through it. So this must be some serious stuff, or there's something else going on that we don't know about.
They came for the ski.
I'll hand it over.
Has anybody made a TJ Maxx joke?
Oh. Oh, wow. Hey, come to the community here.
We get one back.
Did you want
That's a good.
That's
I
good.
feel like we explained to the economic development.
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Press, I'm gonna share my screen now.
Yeah, please. Should be.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Max Garcia with Community Planning Strategies. We're here tonight to discuss Chapter 7 updates to the RMC. It's March 26th. TJ is going to chime in throughout the presentation, but I will be giving it for the most part. I would like to let you know that this goes in the order of the memo, not the memo letter that comes ahead of time, but the actual draft document. So these slides are going to go in order of the actual written concepts that you had attached to that memo.
Could you move the microphone just a little bit closer?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me better now?
That's a lot better.
All right, great. So just like I was saying, it goes in order of those attachments that you have, so just follow along that way as well. As part of our objectives for tonight, to review those Chapter 7 code updates. We're going to be updating them on the economies of places.
Oh, shoot, forgot to forward that. Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so towards the end, we'll talk about the land use portfolio, so that Elliot Weiss with economies of places working on and then finally we'll have the discussion towards the end and understand the approach to the updates that we're going to have. So as quick background, on January 30th, we were given there was 4 updates that we were anticipating to be taking on: the analyzing of the town's land use portfolio, reviewing and updating the parking standards, codifying and drafting regulations for affordable housing, as well as reviewing and updating the town's ADU regulations. At the following meeting on the 27th, we went through some of the best practices research, and we were given the direction to draft a parking code and draft concepts for the ADU. So to keep that in mind throughout this presentation, that these are mostly at the conceptual level, and so that some of the writing is not set in stone, and we have plenty of opportunities to change it, but mostly we're focusing on concepts tonight. So what we're discussing now in Chapter 7 is that parking code and the ADU code. And I'm going to give you an opportunity after each slide just to let the idea settle and let me get your feedback on it so we can then move on to the next idea. We'll just kind of work through that. So we're going to start with the parking code and move on to the ADU code. Okay. Y'all ready? So these are the 8 or 9 concepts we're going to discuss that are coming out of the code. As part of the attachment, of course, all the more detailed information is in there. I'm just going to be going through the main ideas that are within those different code sections. So if there's questions that you have that was written in the attachment, maybe not presented up here, understand this because I'm just kind of glossing over the highlights right now. And of course, if you have questions, speak up. So the first concept that we're going to talk about is reducing and removing parking minimums. As part of the 2018 parking assessment that was completed, I'd like you to point to if you look at the top of this PowerPoint slide, on the top right where that chart is, you see total available parking capacity for the sort of downtown area of Ridgway was about 842, and the requirement was about 229, so that's about three.
Whoa, 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 you're going way too fast, Reyes.
Okay,
Sorry, you're speaking real fast, I'm having trouble keeping up with you.
no worries, sir, I will slow down. So as part of the parking assessment, it was determined that there was a whole lot of available parking. And as part of the assessment, it was also determined that the required amount of parking was vastly exceeding or vastly below what was actually required. So that's about 360% excess. So the intent of reducing and removing some of your parking minimums is going to be dropping it in an equivalent way. So dropping requirements by about 300 to 400% to try and find equilibrium with what you have now and what the parking code could require. Yes, sir.
I've already got a bunch of questions. And I'm in favor of what you're saying, so don't misinterpret my questions. Total available parking, is that for the CBD or is that for all the platted town? When you say in town, does that include just the old plat, or does that include like Solar Ranch, or what does that really include when it says total available parking? What area does that include?
I would say it's mostly the CBD. Right?
CBD, okay, and then required total parking, what? Oh, required off-street, okay, I got it.
I'm sorry, what's CBD?
The central business district.
Okay,
So if you remember,
plus GC.
yeah, so the study area of I don't know that it goes with the zoning district per se.
Okay.
It's kind of the downtown area that was the study area for the 2018 analysis.
And that was the one that was done for the space to create, correct?
No, it wasn't specifically for space to create, it was more just, we got to a point where people were raising the stink, didn't have enough parking, and council decided we needed a parking study.
So that was the one that was used for the parking calculations in the space to create, correct?
No, it has nothing to do with,
Was it an additional?
it has nothing to do with space to create, that's what I'm saying.
It's trying to get a time frame. Is it, was it a subsequent to this?
No.
Okay, that was the question.
It was done, I think it was done before space to create,
Right,
but it didn't have anything to do with space to create.
I understand.
It just has to do with general parking downtown.
But I'm assuming it's the most recent one.
Yes, and if that,
Excellent.
I apologize if that's what you were trying to get clear.
No,
I missed you.
I'm good.
And we didn't take that for gospel, but we assumed that was correct and a good starting point. So this is like, again, what Max is saying, and that's still thunder, but we have data that supports the town of Oak Park. So therefore, if we apply that kind of across the board, let's just start by reducing by 400%, and that's where we started. So that's what the numbers are, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the reason for some of the numbers you see on the parking table in your attachment. So some of the other options in terms of how to then moderate the parking. So instead of just dropping that, or I guess, yeah, changing those minimums, we can also consider other options. So one option we talked about in there, as well as removing those use-specific parking requirements. So one space per 3 chairs, for example. It might make sense for the current use going in, but it won't make sense for maybe the doctor's office that replaces it, for example. So removing those types of determinants is one way to make this parking code clear. Another option is considering putting in a maximum quantity of parking spaces based on the lot or based on lot size, for example. And the intent of that to eliminate empty parking lots for a long period of time over the week. So, think about cultural uses that only have a lot going on the weekends, for example. So we'll move on to the next parking section, but did anyone have any questions about this before I move forward? Very good. Next part is vehicle stacking. Most commonly utilized with like drive-through restaurants and stuff, but it could also be utilized in other aspects, such as uses that have drop-off zones. And another thing that's been considered with the stacking is design standards, putting screening between the drop-off areas or the drive-through areas and between it and the right-of-way, for example, so you have like a visual screening in those stacking areas, but also instituting stacking for maximum stacking for other types of uses, so thinking about daycares, for example. You could have a line of cars in the morning that disrupt the right of way in some way, and this concept would put some regulations around how much stacking is required for a proposed use, as one example. Then you have questions about the parking and stacking.
Just maybe not a clarification, but putting these two together, what we did is, because we're like, shoot, we're really taking a lot of parking away. Like, okay, we need to make them functional. So we kind of looked at both of them together as far as making sure that banks with drive-throughs are functional while not requiring all the parking. Right, and making sure that those are provided off-street so that they're not impeding the travel lanes. Right, so there's some of those kind of things that we added so that maybe you don't have a parking space, but the stacking space is there. Does that make some sense?
You're not gonna stack the cars on top of each other?
No, I don't think we have one of those here. And then you could, that's like the new thing, right? Like vending machines. But also to put it into tangible in the code right now, we added a column to parking standards. So we're gonna get to that. So we added the stacking for each, sorry.
Yeah.
So it's by use too, right? So again, I think we're looking at kind of that package.
I think it'll help to have an example of this. The only thing I can think of is bank ATMs with their own private property. So when we get to that, it would be good to see an example.
Yeah.
Maybe a drive-through liquor store, which we don't have.
Well, no, the other concepts I came up with is like gas stations, which we
Yeah.
already have.
Right.
Use stacking, the daycare that Home Trust is proposing. And
Schools are gonna have the
I'd
most
like to see in schools.
Schools are gonna have the most traffic.
Yes, I agree with you for the most part. I was going, why do we need this? And there are a few, but yeah, we're not expecting McDonald's.
Correct, no, so we did, we got a little bit, if you will, creative with the stacking side.
I think that stacking is only allowed in GC.
Well, it's not anymore,
Okay.
that's, right, it's based on the use. That now, when you come in with a site plan, you need to show that you have adequate stacking for the use.
If that is.
If that's the, right,
Right.
And I have questions when you guys get to the table about the stacking. If you're gonna show the table.
I won't be showing the table in the presentation, so.
Oh, okay.
now's the time.
I just had questions about, for drop-off areas, like I know that some of our facilities here, like the daycare center right now doesn't have designated drop-off. So would we, like, just thinking it through to require that they have drop-off areas, or should it be a good idea that there would be requirements to have drop-off areas?
Right, so the way that this would function is a new site plan comes in. And right now, they would have to prove that they have adequate parking spaces, right, to meet the code. Now they would have to show that they meet adequate parking spaces plus stacking. So we would have the conversation with them when they come in, of daycare. Okay, you're required to have 5 stacking spaces, where are they?
So you're referring to like Voyager? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of an informal stacking that currently exists there.
Correct,
Yeah.
and
Which people can park there right now, but
I
they.
think anybody can, but I think people pull up, get out, take their kids in, come back. So it's not a pull up, out you go and off. But it's like I said, it's kind of an informal stacking, but people do park there as well, so. Yeah.
So would this be grandfathered in, like, so for the gas stations, I don't think right now, yeah.
I hate doing that.
Yeah. But they don't have area that, that you guys had put it in here, or did the Shell station doesn't have the landscaping, the buffering, the screening?
Correct, and the intent will be if they ever got replaced, they would try to make that work if they could.
Yeah, so everything that's out there is grandfathered in, right, legal non-conforming. Once you exceed that new or major change.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the screening. What is that all about?
The intent of the screening is to, and again, an optional idea, but the idea is to provide some sort of visual or architectural block between whatever's being dropped off or picked up, or in the drive-through window, for example, you can put a line of trees or fence line or something that blocks the view of that exchange going on while everyone else is driving by. It would reduce distraction, but also provide,
Where are the headlights is kind of
as well as
the big thing.
Yeah, I just can't see how that's really gonna apply anywhere current or potential locations, but I understand what you're after.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question up here. Pam, I think is trying to get it.
Go ahead, Pam.
So I'm trying to make sure that I understand the purpose of the conversation. Stacking makes sense to improve vehicle flow and safety for pedestrians and kids and everybody else and customers. Is it also the intent to impact the amount of required parking spaces?
So the intent was to, overall reduce parking spaces, but as a result, we still need to be able to provide space for uses that have that stacking capacity or need that stacking capacity. So quite well be that a use could have maybe no required parking, but still have required stacking spaces.
So it's not stacking is not intended to impact parking space requirements. It's to go in conjunction with.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, I'll move on to the next step. All right, next. So this is discussing site plan requirements. So you have before there was a question about what would be required for them to show on the site plan. So for example, here we talk about, maybe showing drop-off zones on the site plan. But also as part of the concepts included in the parking code draft was introducing just more teeth to the site plan requirements. Make sure that they're showing the circulating arrows on a site plan, or giving a better understanding of what the surface materials are. The intent here really is just to boost the site plan requirements, but also put them into the part of the parking code so that a developer knows very early on what is required for their parking code, and that it's kind of in multiple places, right? So it's referencing the site plan, it's in earlier parts of the chapters, but also saying it here and providing that extra teeth to the site plan requirements for parking, just to make it more detailed when they do submit for those parking requirements. So we understand where their stacking is going to be, where drop-off zones might be, as an example. Does anyone have any questions about that?
So if somebody comes a development plan, we want to see what their site plan is for areas of parking, or are we talking stacking again?
This would be included with the stacking, but the intent here is mostly to show that the parking plan or a plan is being made for the parking and it's included on the site plan, making it a requirement with multiple standards that need to be abided by, and just adding some additional to that site plan. So that site plan that's submitted would have to show stacking if that was the direction that y'all chose. So the site plan would include them showing where those stacking spaces are, making sure that the dimensions are meeting the city's or town standards as well.
Okay, thank you.
Next, bicycle parking. So this is a new section to be included in the parking section to establish bicycle spaces for non-residential development and multi-family development. I said exceeding 3 units, but the intent here is really just that for larger developments, larger residential developments, that they have parking or for bicycles. Another part of this was to make it an option to reduce required parking as well. In this case, I wrote in up to 15% could be reduced. Another requirement for bicycle parking being to require it within a certain distance of transit stations and the Riverway Trail. As options, the distance and where they have to be in proximity to are obviously changes that you can make, but the intent here is to require bicycle parking throughout the city, especially within the more central part of the town. And then, in addition, some design standards, just to decide, what is a bike rack? A bike rack supports 2 bicycles, for example.
Just a quick question on the 3-unit issue. Did you have a particular rationale for 3 units?
No, sir, but the intent here is to say that as the families get larger within these dwellings, as the population gets larger, it makes sense to provide that parking.
I'm just kind of comparing that to some of the newer 4-unit places over River Park or near River Park. It seems to me that 4 would probably be a better cutoff than 3, because you're really talking about truly multi-family development if you're talking about more than 4. But I think 4 is it's reasonable to not have to provide quite as much amenities if you're building a 4-plex or it's essentially 2. So that would be my suggestion, would be to make 4 the cutoff.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I've got a question. What would happen if it was more than 2,000 feet from the river trail, or we don't really have transit stations? So we don't have much bike river trail in town. So it'd be hard. There's a lot of.
The transit station is in the bus stops.
I'm sorry.
The bus stops, like the visitor center down across from the bank. There's one out on the other side of the highway where Mustang stops. So those are considered transit stations.
Right, but there's none by the schools. There's none.
I'm
by
not
the high
reading it
school.
that that's only the case. I'm reading that in addition, it's required, right?
Yeah, so the intent would be not only would you have it in non-residential development, multifamily, you would also if you're within 2,000 feet, potentially having.
Okay.
I had a concern about doing the required non-residential development just for some of the establishments, like a gas station or a hospital or a medical center. I wouldn't think that people could necessarily ride their bikes to those kinds of things. Or if we would have a variance or something, that's,
A variance for what? The med center?
that they wouldn't require a bike.
I don't think it hurts. I mean, it's not gonna take up that much
It
space.
doesn't cost a lot of money either. It's not a big, I don't think it's a real.
It's not a big infrastructure thing.
Yeah, just the way I was reading it, it just sounded like you could take a parking space and turn it into a bicycle or motorcycle space. So I was just thinking, like, some places like a gas station doesn't, you wouldn't necessarily ride your bike there.
And why is it so far from, why 2,000 feet? That seems really far. That's 0.2 of a mile.
Yes, and so the reason that we picked 2,000 was because it stretched. It's about 5 blocks in town. And it was also the distance to your park to the south as well to the east. So that was the distance that we picked as an understanding that you might need a bicycle to the park, right? 2,000 feet is the distance that it is. So that was the thought behind the value, but that's very much flexible.
I guess the way I see it is we've got a new bus system coming between Uray and Montrose. If people want to ride their bike to go get the bus, they don't want to then get off their bike and then walk 2,000 feet to get on the bus.
No, I think
You're misunderstanding.
So the concept here is that if you're within let's say, people are gonna be using the trail and transit to get places. And they could be taking their bike. And so establishments within 2,000 feet of the trail or a transit station should accommodate those individuals who are using bike as their main transport. So they would ride their bike from the bus to the final destination.
Yes.
And there's a bike rack there for them to leave it at.
So you're saying as far as within 2,000 feet?
Correct, it's the other way
It's
around.
not,
It's to
yeah,
accommodate them parking their bike after they've used transit or the trail. Not.
Right.
And that's why the distance is so great. You want to have as many places for them to park as they're coming into town and using businesses and whatnot.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense. And I really think, I want to stress that, the great thing about this whole concept of reducing parking is to encourage multimodal transportation. And so the bike parking is really important. As is pursuing more bus transportation and all modes of multimodal transportation, because this is only going to work if we encourage people to use other methods of transportation.
If I might just add on to that concept, that everything that we're talking about here would fall under the administrative adjustment and the variance. So there's plenty of relief valves for those who really can't meet it. But to your point, we do want to encourage this.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're trying to do.
That's a good point.
I don't think it's a heavy lifting. I just don't, I think it's a good idea to require. I don't think it's a big impact on the developer. So I mean,
To put in bike racks.
Yeah.
No,
put a
no,
bike
I don't know.
rack or, like, to forfeit 1 or 2 parking spaces for a bike rack, I think it's a good requirement.
Maybe another,
Put it in the park. You could put it in his
Yeah.
open space.
like an anecdotal situation that I don't think we ever talked about here. We're gonna be going through a lot of redevelopment too. We had a potential brewery coming in across the street here, and they could not at all meet the parking requirements. Not at all. And so to try to accommodate some of that stuff, we started looking at, well, where can on-street parking be? What makes sense? So we actually said, hey, you need to put in some bike racks to try to make up for that. And so it's also a way to retrofit some of the current uses and encourage some of those activities as well. So it kind of gives, if you will, staff a little bit more flexibility in that interpretation too.
And as we move forward, you'll see that there's a few avenues in which we're hoping to reduce parking. Next we have here is the concept of a shared parking plan. So the intent of the shared parking plan is that it's required for proposed development that utilize off-site parking and may request to eliminate all or percentage of their required parking. The intent here is that if you have a development and the parking on the site would be very tight, you could instead reach out to your neighbors, other local businesses, the car lot, whatever it might be, and cooperate and prepare a plan to utilize that parking together. And as part of that plan, it would consider, peak hours of service, right? If one of those uses is a religious institute and they need it for Sundays mostly, then the businesses that are using it Monday to Friday aren't disturbing their parking needs. This shared parking plan would also consider impact on adjacent development, right? So if you have an empty parking lot next to residences, providing some form of agreement within that plan to say, we're gonna put up some screening, fence, or something to block car lights going into your residential neighborhood. Including it as part of the site plan process, so that way we know very far ahead of time how they intend to use parking. And then, you wanted to making that agreement recorded with the county, for example. Another idea that could be used for the shared parking plan is for your special events. For any major special event that had was going to be utilizing parking throughout town, could submit a shared parking plan as part of that special events permit, if that's how the special event is regulated. But that's not something we have right now, but it's an idea to think about as something to submit when we know special events coming to town. So that way, very far ahead of time, you know if they're using public transportation, if they're gonna have like bike couriers, of that nature. Yes, do we have any questions about a shared parking plan concept?
I think it's a fabulous concept, fabulous. Nightclub next to a bank, fabulous. I mean, I've seen it work wonderfully in other venues.
Okay, great, I'll move to the next one. All right, EV parking. So, for electric vehicle parking, what I proposed in that draft is to not require EV installed or EV capable parking. I'm going to explain what each of those mean. EV capable is simply that there is a panel nearby that has conduit running into the parking. So not necessarily two-way space, but there is electrical outlet somewhere nearby. EV ready would mean that there's an outlet coming up to those spaces. And then finally, EV installed would mean that all the equipment is there and a car could pull up and charge that day. As part of this concept, we made it to where EV ready wouldn't even be required until you had 25 plus required parking spaces. As I mentioned, there's no requirement for EV capable or EV installed at all either. And also EV parking would not count towards the required parking count. It would be totally market driven. So the idea here being that it's not a massive lift for a developer to have that EV ready as prepared for a larger development. But maybe it's not something we need at this time. But the idea here is that EV ready would set up the developer for including it later.
Question that it's not, doesn't count towards parking. I mean, if it's just capable or ready, that should be an available parking space, at least until it's installed.
Yep.
Because someone could park there.
Yes.
And if it's installed, then an electric vehicle can park there.
Yes.
So why wouldn't it count?
So the idea of an EV is also that it's more like a gas station in a way too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not intended for permanent parking.
Mm-hmm.
So an EV parking space, even if it was installed later, isn't going to be there for more than 1 or 2 hours. So the intent there is to share, not necessarily have it there permanently for one car. But yeah, certainly can make it a requirement to be counted towards your parking requirements.
Especially since it doesn't come into effect until there's 25 spots. That's a lot of spots. So
Yes.
it seems like perhaps it could count.
Yes.
Would you have any space in town that has 25 spots?
Yeah.
Maybe Mount Market.
Right out by town halls.
There's 25 spaces in that?
Sure. Well, and there's two
I guess
EVs,
maybe.
right?
Yes, maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah, not Marcy.
I just didn't think it was that big, but I guess it is.
But that would also apply to places like Riverfront, right?
Like what?
Riverfront Village?
Yeah.
I mean, there are quite a bit of similar installation. With this, they would have to at least do EV ready.
And I would say that this is a pretty lax requirement, as far as EV spaces go. Best practices we reviewed at the last meeting, most cities now are requiring EV installed, but like I said, it could certainly count towards required parking, and it would make sense to. The intent here is it's probably gonna be more market driven based on what that use is. If they feel like they want to put in EV parking, in most instances, it's gonna be the residential use, putting in an EV spot inside a garage space.
Yeah, I definitely see some value to counting it toward their parking requirements. it's throwing them a bone, and it's, it's part and parcel of reducing the amount of spaces they have to provide, which is reducing the parking. So,
And then we don't have to explain to them why it's not counted.
yeah, exactly.
So just spitballing here, something that could, concepts are, it could count towards half a spot. Right, something like that, or it's just business on their reaction, maybe not that, but you can provide it up to 10% of your required parking, right? Something along those lines. And the reason is that because to Max's point, and it comes down to the enforcement of it, right? There's still this balance out there trying to figure it out of do you enforce, I've seen some places that say, thou shalt not park here except for an EV, right? So it really doesn't count towards a parking space for others, right? So you need to kind of balance that. If I were to park in there in my truck and somebody were to need it for a EV, right? Their Prius, then
That's a good point.
am I gonna get towed because I'm right? So there are some limitations on it. And
Are
so
there
what-
EV regs in places where you have a limited time, or could someone just park there and plug their car in and leave for the day?
You know what the incentive is you get charged by, most of them you pay for the electricity you use. And if you stay there, you keep paying.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
That's what I've seen.
Yeah, and so really it becomes, how do you incentivize people who are not using it for the EV to not use it? Right, or maybe reserve it for those,
It seems that
while also
once,
still counting it.
once it's installed, it should be reserved for only, obviously, similar to handicapped.
And at some point, right, we'll be at a point where there's 20% of the cars on the road. I don't even know what the number is, maybe it's that now, right?
It's surprising.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Tesla charging station just down the road from my house, and it's always packed. So maybe it's 40%, right? So maybe it's 30, up to 30%. Right, I don't know, it's,
Well, in which
We can
case
use a
it
little
might
bit
be
more.
low, right? 20 after 25, maybe we'll need to change that.
yeah, and, sorry, say that again?
You said it's not required until there's 25, maybe that number's low,
Maybe that number's high,
right? High.
right, so reduce it, yeah, I mean, I guess.
At some point, it seems like that number would be high,
Mhm.
but I don't know how we adjust for that over time.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other thing to also kind of remember. Again, we'll take the feedback and go back and, noodle around on it, but whatever we come up with. We'll probably be wrong in 2 years, if not sooner, right? But if at least we have a little spot and say, oh, shoot, it definitely isn't 25, let's change it to 10. That's an easy amendment. If it's 20%, if we have that concept. Right, of, hey, let's do a percentage, or it counts towards the numbers of required, right, whatever that is, it's easy to change it later on. When we have more usable data, right now, it's kind of a lot of what ifs and theory.
So you're saying, I'm using the number 25%, but just for example, so it might be 25% of all parking spaces in this designated area. It doesn't have to be per block or whatever. It's just that we're going to shoot for that as a goal. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think so. The way that would work is, someone comes in with a site plan. And they're required 10 parking spaces based on the parking requirements. And whatever this percentage is, if it's 25%, 4 of them, 3, 2.5. So 3 would have to be EV ready. So 3 of the 10 on that site plan would have to be EV ready. So we would look at it as a site plan level.
Seems like a lot to me.
That's probably a realistic scenario.
Eventually,
So if I'm a small, I'm an attorney and I'm going to set up a small shop, I may only have 2 parking spaces. Do they have to pay a credit towards another EV spot somewhere in town? What
no,
do
that's why
we?
Under provisions, it says required for developments that have 25 plus required parking spaces. So the way they're proposing it right now, you're not required to have one at all unless you have a business that requires more than 25 parking spaces. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
thank you. Yeah, thank you. I keep switching screens and I forgot that. So
Right.
is that enough if we're saying you have to have 25 or greater parking spaces, does that help us grow enough EV spots for the goal that we're trying to set ourselves for the future? Because we don't have a lot of businesses with that many parking spaces.
Yeah.
Someday we'll have grocery store and someday we'll have a bigger medical center. Those are about the only things I can think of that would have that big a parking lot. I'm just
So
asking.
this, I
Well,
don't
it
think
could be
this
a apartment complex or a bank. Of course, we already have our bank, so we don't think we'll get another new one.
Or a commercial office.
mixed use in.
Mixed use,
Well,
yeah.
the visitor center would be a good place for some.
I mean, I think the idea of a credit's a real good idea. If they didn't want it, they could pay for a credit at the visitor center. I like that. We could get someone where we need them as a town, as opposed to they don't think they need them. And it's like, what'd you call it, a transferable parking credit or transferable EV credit? Something like that's a great idea.
I think that the more I think about it, I think that 25 plus number is too high. I think it should be more like 20. Maybe even 15, but that is, again, it's one of those deals that what it should be now is going to be different than what it should be in 10 or 20
But
years.
at the moment, it's still a little high.
I think it's a mistake to nail that number down now until we process all, because if we have a 10-unit apartment complex that's only required 2 spaces, then the 25 is real high. If we have a 10-unit apartment complex that's required 20 spaces, then it's not so high.
So
So
another,
it really depends on how much we reduce it, because it's gonna get larger as we reduce.
so 2 concepts that Max and I were noodling on when we got to this, that a real possibility is that a lot of development, a lot of properties could only require 1 parking space and that be handicap accessible parking space based on this, right? So that is a real thing. And so we noodle on that. Do we think that's okay? And frankly, yes, right? The idea is, hey, there's gonna be plenty of parking around, park down the street and walk, right? If you have a parking problem, it's not a parking problem, it's an inconvenience problem. Or convenience problem, right? So at least that was when we were going through that, that's a real scenario that you should all kind of understand also. With that too, is that if we are trying to also get EV spots out there, and that's a real situation, then you're not gonna get them where you probably need them.
Right.
Um,
Or you want them.
or yeah. Another question, I'm not sure, it's a little sort of off topic, but I know there's somebody who approached the town about doing EV in parks or on streets and stuff. I kind of like that idea that if the town takes on that role of doing some,
He was going for a grant to do it.
yeah. He's John has worked with a couple of our clients around the state too. So, but there's a great idea where you all, the town has a program, park at town park here, and walk. So that's a good opportunity too.
I like the idea that if we're gonna be greatly reducing parking spaces that people normally would have had to, developers might have had to buy out of those parking spaces, that we do put in the EV thing, that we can maybe increase the number in the town lot here, or like someone mentioned, the visitor center, or get something in trade where we used to charge to reduce the parking. We're just doing it, but they still can contribute to that. Maybe even to a fund to improve a parking lot that the town already has, or something like that, but at least the EV space thing.
I
It doesn't
love
have to
that
be a
idea.
lot of money, but something.
I love that idea. But I think it's a little bit off subject here, but in the real estate business, I see a couple of large pieces of property that are circulating, possibly coming on the market. Like the piece behind Drake's, the place that cost for the space to create, they're not on the market yet, but they might be this year. And those would be 10 or 15 unit apartment buildings. So if we reduce those parking spaces to a lot, that 25 space requirement is super high.
Yeah, well, but here's the other thing, Jack, you probably speak to this quite well, that any developer is gonna know their market
Right.
and know whether or not they want to do zero parking spaces,
They're not doing it.
right?
And,
So what we're trying to do too, this is the other thought I had, that we're trying to basically never get in the way of the market, right? And so by reducing these enough and getting to that point of, hey, the town only requires the health, safety, welfare, the bare minimums. We're not gonna tell you what you need for your business. We understand there's plenty of parking around.
That's one of the things that I read in that when I was researching the concepts behind all the move to reduce parking regs. And one of the main ones that was said multiple times is that the idea is to let the market decide how many spaces a particular project needs. And I
it's a
see.
novel idea. So far from what I was trying.
It's not the way it's been done in.
No.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it is.
It's so far different from what we've been doing.
So requiring 2 parking spaces is great, because then the market will say, hey, we need 6.
I think the developer's gonna want garages. I mean, he's got
Right.
covered space. He's gonna want the opposite.
Yeah. But I do love the idea, and I think we can, if we can, we've batted this thing around at least, I think, enough. I don't wanna stop anyone, but I think we can take this concept back, come back with this EV concept of a fee in lieu, or it's just either provide 1 or $3,000 or I don't know.
Do we have a fee in lieu now for
Right.
parking? I know that we
So
can have
that was one thing that we talked about too, we basically took out.
Yep.
Because
It's gone.
because again, we wanted to say, hey, market, you know, if we're providing the minimums, then what's even the point, right?
Well, I think the point.
But if we're doing it for EV,
Do we
I think
need to
that makes
improve public parking spaces like paving the parking at the visitor center? I mean, we could,
well, I mean, the cost of a parking space now is $10,000, right? Like,
it's cheap. It's cheap, 10,000, in my opinion.
well, no, yes.
The problem is that the fee that we've had on the books for paying for a space is nowhere near $10,000. It's
Right.
It's 3 something.
Yeah, it should be more, but I think $10,000 is a reasonable fee, but I think we're the weeds here.
And if it were 10,000 or even 12,000, would that be enough incentive for somebody to not put in a parking space and actually pay the fee? I don't see that.
One thing that came up in best
I don't
practices
know.
was that specific fear was that some developers would see that it was cheaper to just buy the property next door instead of paying all of those fees for the parking they didn't want to put in.
Right.
So that is one thing we need to avoid. But one more thing, just before we move on, just that, we can turn the knob as much as we need to on, when it is required. But it's important enough that it's in the code now, right? So it's easier to talk about more later instead of trying to create a whole new EV code when it is a concern. Okay.
Just to kind of summarize what we're hearing. 1, we're okay with the requirements of EV renting. 2, reduce the amount of parking that requirement would come in. Right, so from 25 to 10 or 15 something, and then require, maybe even jump that requirement up to the required 1 per every half space. We'll come up with something like, right, two spaces or whatever, and then there's a fee that can be paid to the town in lieu of providing. Those are kind of
Providing the EV space.
EV space. So it's kind of a 3-pronged thing. Does that at least in concept sound okay?
Yep. All right, next is just overall parking reductions. So the idea that, we talked about this a little bit already, but using 1 vehicular space for 2 bicycle spaces instead as a way to reduce it. But overall, the tool here is that you can reduce your parking requirements by up to 50%. Based on, a few specific ways. One being that bicycle parking swap. Another being if you're within a specific distance of a transit station or bus stop. Another one being twice your vehicle space with 2 motorcycle spaces. And then reducing the parking requirement flatly by 50% for any designated historical property. And any property that has been around for a while. You probably want to do a better analysis on, what would be a considered historical property without actually being designated historical. But the idea there is simply that if you have a historic property that does not have parking space because parking was not a concern when it was built, the idea here is that if you go to redevelop it, they now have reduced parking requirements before any of the other parking requirements are even set in. But these are just a few simple ideas to reduce your parking. And these are just ones that I come up with that we've seen. But we're also open to other provisions as well. Do we have any comments about those provisions?
We're reducing parking by 50% from the parking code that we have now, or parking code that we haven't established yet.
Parking that we haven't established yet.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so there might be a scenario where you have very little amount of parking required, and then you can further reduce that by replacing it all with bicycle or motorcycle parking. Most of them.
Okay.
But the idea here is simply continue chopping down the amount of parking.
I guess we weren't asked to think too far out of the box on the parking stuff, but we did.
It's impressive. Yeah, it's very impressive to me.
So
Is that the last slide?
No.
I think it should be like 6 of, so we know. 6 of 20 or 6 of 9.
Okay, your next presentation will have it.
well, that's page, isn't that page? That's the code. So
Yeah, sorry.
long.
Yeah, so sorry, I realized that was confusing. But yeah, that's the reference to the
All right.
short attachment. My apologies.
Slideshow.
All right. I believe this is the last one for the parking concept, but handicap accessible parking required by ADA needs to be in there. But this is to establish a subsection for that required handicap accessible parking for all developments excluding single family and duplex.
So that's not debatable. That's just, there's standards that we need to follow.
It's federal.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
And we can now what we've proposed in the is providing a table so that developers can see, how many handicap parking spaces are required. But how we turn the knobs inside the code itself, but to understand that this is a requirement, and it's going to be, and it's also to clarify, based on what's provided as well.
I like the table.
Based on what?
Provided spaces, so it's not required spaces. Handicap accessible comes in no matter what phase of parking. If you have 6 parking spaces, one of those is going to be handicap parking.
So it's a percentage, is that what you're saying?
Sort of. The table is in the attachments. You can see the example, but it's also that table comes straight from the ADA guidance.
So it's
Page 6.
like if there's a requirement of 1 to 25 off-street parking spaces, you have to provide 1 handicap space. 26 to 50, you need 2, right?
Yo,
So that's probably where we're at,
yo,
but.
Okay.
So that's why conceivably you can have 1 handicap parking
it
space.
seems simple.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right.
50 spaces in this town's a big parking.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got them all over the public.
On the street,
The street parking. There's like 4 on every block, like.
Oh, I'm just surprised that federal requirement was that.
Well, that is all I have on parking concepts. The next slide, we'll start talking about ADUs, but before we move on, do we want to throw off any more ideas regarding parking?
I just had a question for the town of Preston about parking. Since we're doing a lot of off-street parking, or we want people to use the off-street parking. How is this, what would be the protocol for snow removal then?
If they're.
If we're saying you have to use off-street parking, would there be rules like you can't park here on snow days between midnight and 5 or whatever?
Well, if they can't plow the street because there's cars parked there, are the people gonna be required to remove the snow, or how do we handle complaints about the snow?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, right now, if they're publicly dedicated parking spaces, it's on the town to remove the snow. We do have some signage in certain areas about that, like Russell, you were saying. So, if this is wildly successful and as we continue to grow, make it to a point where we have to provide for some more rules and guidelines for that. But your question here in the short term, the town would still be expected to remove snow from those parking spaces.
If they're public,
Communicate with
if they're
residents.
public lots. So trash.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's an interesting question because like you see these signs, there's no parking here on snow days between 12 and 5, whatever it is, and the people are, just use the space to create, for example, and they're parking on the street, they have to move their car at night. That's a pain. I mean, I think that's a pretty significant issue that we need to think about. Fortunately, we don't get much snow anymore, but
Yeah, I was gonna say, we don't have to worry about this, we're not gonna get snow.
no snow required.
It's an interesting concept. So typically the signs are there, right? And I know you guys have the signs because stayed here one night, was like, oh shoot, I might have had to move last night. But Silverton actually sends out notices, emails or whatnot, and says, hey, we're in this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that we're in, no parking on Green Street, right, between now and tomorrow or something. So granted, that's a whole different ball of wax.
We can hire Silverton to do that for us.
Well, we're gonna get to that point, so.
Yeah,
Well-
I mean, it's true, but again, you start having some problems when you require on-street parking, start using the on-street parking more regularly.
I live in the historic residential and the town does not plow the shoulder. And so if people are parking there, they basically have to shovel it out, but it's a public space. So then someone could come along and park in that shoveled out space that you shoveled out in front of your house. So it's a little tricky. I know that's the case on Charles Street as well as on Cora where I live.
What Telluride does is on certain streets, they tell you no parking on this side of the street on Wednesdays. And it just lets everybody know, don't park there because they're going to tow you because they're going to plow that side of the street. And then a different day will be a different side of a different street. That's how they.
Most communities do it.
and then I just wanted to mention another thing, just because something happened, I think it was last year, where somebody left their car in the street over by the condos. And it was kind of annoying because you had to go around it, but it was sitting there for like a week. And luckily somebody like pushed it out of the way and put it in the Remax parking lot. But I was just thinking, like, since you don't just tow cars anymore, it's like, how long can a car sit there? I mean, if it's in some place that it's not supposed to be or shouldn't be, like, just people are leaving their cars and leaving their bikes. Abandoned cars and bikes.
But we have rules and regs for vehicles in public parking spots for too long. We have measures that we can take to remove those cars. I remember what you were talking about. That car that was the Honda parking lot, right? Private.
Well, it was in the street at first, like literally sitting in the street.
In the street, like regular circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, which isn't a town designated street, so that was an issue. And so I think someone took it upon themselves to just like
Get it out of the way.
get it out of the way and move it to the Remax lot, which first of all, not kosher, but it happened, and then so, yeah. But we have rules and mechanisms to get cars moved.
Oh, okay. It was a nice car too, and I was like, well, I'll just continue. I was like, abandon it.
So any more input on parking?
Got your marching orders.
I have no more, because I have a good idea of what we need to do.
Just to clarify, sounds like we hit the mark on a lot of it.
So that was up on the back.
Yeah, don't be yourself. Great job.
Do we want to come back for another work session? On this?
I don't know, I think we can review what you read up and make changes there. Like you had something about, you know, I don't know, you said a minimum of 2, which I thought was a low number. Those are easily changed once you've written something. So I question that we need another work session. I think we,
I think if you bring a draft.
yeah. Oh, no, I think you can write it up and we can go through that.
And then, I mean, what I'd like to do, if at all possible, for both of these, right, is if we're at a point where it's worth kind of, if we're just tweaking some numbers,
Yeah,
then let's get the work going.
just leave a few rabbit holes in there so we can go ahead and go down.
I'll make sure I use it, but I think we look at kind of the proposed language. And that's what we'll have for
Yeah,
next month.
Sounds good.
full steam ahead.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so in your attachment, there was these options here where we talked about, you know, if you wanted to revert it back to what it was, things you did. Made those notes inside the attachments you have as a thought. So if you know, there's some things in market you want to keep, talk about those too.
I'm pretty happy with what you guys are suggesting. Maybe just, maybe, I don't know, probably a Friday is enough time, but if we were able to get it a little sooner, so we had a little more time to review it, that might be nice, but just a thought.
Yeah, it won't be too much different than what you have in front of you right now, the red line. Okay,
All right, time for accessory dwelling units.
Oh, boy.
I'm excited about this section,
Hey.
way more than parking.
Yeah,
Yo. Why I joined the commission.
Wow, so before we get started, I will say we thought way outside the box. That's a surprise.
On ADUs?
Think y'all are gonna like
So-
it.
It was fun.
yeah, I love this one.
Yeah, I don't think you were that far outside the box, but okay.
Not for old Joe.
Oh, gosh, okay, well, just bigger. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah, it's not updating up there, but
We're tired of these AD.
There we go.
already. So these are the main ideas here, like before we go through the major highlights of that attachments here memo, the draft. I'm not covering the minor details that were written in there, but going over the major points. And on the left side, I'm gonna include the page numbers from the attached, so you can follow along there on the left side of the attachments.
Makes sense.
So the first one that we're going to review is it's like.
Yeah, that's like frozen, I don't know why. Which slide are you on?
Uh-oh.
The one with the exclamation point?
Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe just takes a moment.
Oh, here.
Well,
There was the sign said the internet was unstable, but it was a little while ago, so
Oh,
maybe it happens. Technically.
all right, well, if that's the case, I'll try to move just a little bit slow to get that time to catch up. But the first icon that we're talking about is not as exciting, but it's just reorganizing the ADU code so that it's more people, as opposed to just putting bullet points straight down the line, giving it some organization, giving it some clarity, making it easier to read.
I like that.
Yeah, and as part of the initial organization, the first one, general provision statement, it's going to include, or the intent here was to include some encouraging statements about what the town hopes to see from the ADU construction. So two main areas is ADUs, our commitment to reducing the housing unaffordability for communities, or providing alternative construction methods that are, you know, sustainable and efficient appliances.
Do we want alternative construction methods in the overall building code, not just ADU, right? Because you certainly get that with your main house as well.
Certainly could. The intent and the focus here is, you know, the accessory dwelling units, but yes, certainly the idea there. And we'll talk about this more later, but the intent of the, you know, getting a certified construction method with the ADU would be to increase density, or not increase density, but increase your square footage. So what what we're talking about later is how if you build something that's, being silver, you can increase your square footage because that's a building that's gonna have more efficient uses of materials. That's the main idea. Hoping that, that would encourage.
Keep us in that later.
Yeah, I hope there's encourage different.
That's good.
And like there's other certification methods that the town prefers that's totally out from day years.
We know what the different ones that haven't been established yet. That's what I think that industry is changing rapidly. So there's the certification out there. We know about years. So we should allow them to come to us and then we can decide if we like them. And I think the foundation of the you have to be acceptable or you can't afford leads. That would be my concern.
Because LEED is an expensive, very costly certification.
Yeah, and I use that as most widely recognized, but I agree, it is an expensive issue process. All right. Next is talking about reducing the dimensional standard, and this can't see up there yet, but it's gonna come. And the intent is to modify the dimensional requirements and add dimensional requirements as a table within the ADU code itself. Currently, it requires you to align with the single-family dwelling zoning standards. And what this is proposing instead is to have a separate table specific to ADUs. What those dimensional standards are, not in turn, but the intent there is to provide a separate table that's separate from the zoning district standards, and instead of providing something that makes sense for just ADUs. There we go. So the primary ones being is that our primary point here that allow ADU construction in all residential uses. Right, so now talking about multifamily, triplexes, duplexes as well. Currently only allowed in the same family area. That's one major point here. The next one is to allow up to 2 ADUs based on lot size. The numbers of the code were saying that if it's less than 7,500 square feet, you can only have 1 ADU. If your lot size is less than 12,000 square feet, you can have 2 ADUs. So that's the main idea there. And it could then again increase density if you if you decide to allow as unrestricted. So you can now say a 2,000 square foot lot, you could have 2 ADUs, but now you can have a third one if that third ADU is affordable housing. That's the main idea behind increasing density. You can also increase the density if you provide a sustainable construction methods. Again, increase density if you are willing to do something like that. And then modifying those building coverage requirements, part of the dimensional tables to allow for this size to be possible. I can't imagine a ton of locations where 7,000 square foot lot could have 2 ADUs, what's incorrect and one that's allowed code. But the intent is to allow it if it's feasible and give the most flexibility that you can to that lot size.
So that's where that comes into play, depending on the size of the houses are there. You might not be able to fit because there's a percentage of that you're allowed, that you're limited to.
Yes, and I would like to clarify something that part of the table in your attachments is that the maximum building coverage, it has values between 35 and 25%. That's specific to the ADUs. So this has own lot coverage requirements, but the intent of the dimensional table having its own maximum building coverage would be a separate thing from just ADUs. So one lower density residential districts is like 25%. So no more than 25% of your lot can be covered by ADU. So there is some of that restriction based on building coverage, and why we felt it was important to move the table into the ADU code so that you can have flexibility with those values. I think most of those values are probably about half in terms of setback, for example. If it doesn't setback, I think we're putting in the tables 3 feet, for example.
So we probably need to be careful that we're not setting people up to say, oh, you could have 2 ADUs, but then there's hardly any place where that could actually happen based on, right? We need to make sure that we're not
Yeah,
crossing.
I don't see this happening on houses that aren't, I should happen on houses that are not built yet. Because the site plan has to be so specific, it'd be hard to fit this into an existing house. This would be something that a real smart architect could plan for and maximize the ADUs. I don't see it fitting into an existing site now. It could be
Multiple ADU.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd have to have-
I mean, I would have a big lot.
There's some big lots, so,
The multiple
There's some big lots of-
ADUs
There's some big lots for
could be used connected.
what's that?
Could they be a townhouse? 2 ADUs connected?
Yeah, and you know, one common ADU is an ADU that's converting existing room. So for example, you know, you convert your garage into an ADU, then you build another ADU backyard. If you're single family without one ADU, you can't do that. So by, you know, increasing that density, you could convert your garage or a room. Those are the things.
I have a question about this draft thing that you gave us. What's this based on, redlining and the? Is it based on the existing code in this case? Because the I guess the parking one is too. Okay.
Yeah, we did with the code to make it easier to grab
Yeah, I
what it
understand.
looks like, but
So,
so
I guess then back to what Jack was just saying, that the multiple ADU idea is definitely. It doesn't disincentivize ADUs on existing old town small lots, right? I mean, what I'm still trying to wrap my head around is that how we did the whole land use code so that you only need 125-foot lot to build, and you can still have an ADU on that. So that's 3,750 square foot lot. Does this still allow that to just change?
This is less than 7.2.
Yeah, I don't think this would have happening still. What this proposal removes what currently exists is requirement for. Let's swim.
6,000. Right, so the way it is right now is that an ADU requires a minimum lot size of 6,000.
Okay,
So
did we do that? Did we do that when we split? When we reduced the required?
I thought it was 25 by 142, you know.
That's short term.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's.
You can have a maximum of 152 now, maybe currently, I believe.
Yeah, I agree.
okay, sorry, so yeah, that was for short term rental, right? A lot less upon which.
Yeah, let's stick a pin in that, because I want to make sure that what we do here gets rid of that short-term rental weirdness.
Yeah, I think that, I especially looking through it, I think what happened is we're looking through a bunch of different concepts, put them together. I think what we're gonna do is get rid of those lot size requirements. Potentially. And if you had to go to the table, right, I think it wasn't really the table in the lot size requirements. Necessarily.
One of the issues with that small 25 by 142 is we're talking about some increased ADU sizes. I don't know that they should be allowed to increase that small of a property. That's pretty small.
Well, certainly if we have a footprint, maximum lot or ADU footprint, that's gonna quash that
Okay.
together. But I'm going to completely quash it all together. That's. I mean, I really like some of the concepts you've thrown out here, and I have to admit, I didn't have to really dig deep on it. I basically got to skim it. So I'm still trying to wrap my mind around some of this stuff, but
One of the big things that just really is that what we said is, okay, the concept, one of the big concepts behind this is, okay, accessory dwelling unit is 2 to 1. Right, so now rather than a 1-to-1 ratio, 2 ADUs, 1 dwelling unit is considered accessory. That is the big concept here. So so you can have 2 for every 1 unit in essence. Yep.
across the board,
Yep.
even in 25, 142.
Yes, so that. That's your allowed uses, and then you have to kind of.
You have to do how much, yeah.
That's the concept, and this is what helps me understand it, okay. I can convert my basement, probably not too many basements right here, but. Attic, right, to an ADU and to a detached garage. That's the concept that I think is probably gonna be the most.
Have you guys knew and talked about how this might be overkill?
Yeah. Yes,
I mean, I think that
exactly.
right now, around my mind, I have neighbors that are gonna be like, what?
My first thought was that we could, if people could build maybe a larger ADU based on the standards, not necessarily build two
Well, there should be a unit number. I think it should be site coverage ratio, but that's just me.
Yeah. Well, potentially, yeah, right, and it is included, has to be within the same lot coverage of your, overall allowance. So it's not a separate one, that's kind of what I'm thinking, at least at the moment. And see how, and we can probably play with a couple of different scenarios where we actually tweak something and say, here's what it looks like.
So you think about increasing our current site coverage ratio requirements?
No,
Leaving them
no,
the same?
so we're not doing anything to the zone districts. Right, so all the zone district dimensional standards are staying the same. What we've attempted to do with the table is say, like, let's just look at the ADU itself and give it its own standards.
I like that.
But what it does is it goes back to exactly what you're talking about, where now you have reduced setbacks. Now, those are the unintended consequences that what I'm hearing and sensing, maybe I'm sensing some too that I'm not hearing, is that the unintended consequence of that potentially allows for a larger lot coverage and pushing to the property lines, which is going to have that impact on neighbors, change the character of that neighborhood for that detached unit. Whereas if we kept the original setbacks, we at least have that area confined.
I think that was done when they changed the 25-foot lots. I don't think adding the ADUs changes that.
Well, it does by what we're proposing, that's what I'm saying. That we're reducing setbacks
Okay.
for ADUs.
The
In
25-foot lot has some unintended consequences that we haven't dealt with. Like this, how, like what I just said with the house or garage and apartment above.
I question reducing setbacks. I think they're pretty low already.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not okay with reducing setbacks.
Yeah, and I think TJ's saying he's come around to that.
yes, I don't think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, keeping them is good. Keeping-
Very good. All right.
Cool.
This is quickly stating to, because we're talking about updating parking code, but the intent of this is simply to stay within the code, in the draft y'all have. That we're gonna make sure that ADU is compliant with the current residential design standards. Compliant with the updated parking standards, for an ADU that's probably gonna end up being one parking space per ADU. And then, also floating the idea here of, making sure that the design is compatible with adjacent lots, or sorry, the main structure, the principal structure, right? Making sure the ADU kind of looks like the house that's on the same lot. And then also considering height limits as well. The example here being, if the height of your buildings on adjacent lots are much higher, then you can do an ADU based on a percentage of that height. And same thing for if you're adjacent to really low-lying ranch homes, that your ADU cannot be towering over them, and that needs to be a percentage of that height. So that's a standard that is just to make it more like the principal standard requirement, having make it look similar to the accessory, making sure the accessory building looks like the principal structure. It's also making sure it looks like the rest of the.
I think it's very good.
Great.
Then one other thing we floated was about requiring it to be compliant with landscape plan. The idea there being if your ADU is going to take up 700 square feet building, then you need to replace that with some percentage back. It's not on the slide here, that's what I'm saying it, but it was another idea that we floated as part of aligning the ADU with the standards of residential construction.
So, yeah, I'd seen that earlier in the notes, and to me, I don't think that the ADU necessarily has to have its own landscape. I think it should just be depending on the overall lot. So you still have to meet those lot requirements.
Would an ADU, so kind of going back to jogging memories of the landscape code, we had specific things that triggered the landscape code. I would suspect that most ADUs, I'm just picking that, right? Yours would probably not initiate or require your property to meet the new landscape codes
Why not?
because of the thresholds that we have in. So one of the things, the thought here is, do we say, okay, for ADUs, that does trigger the landscape requirements. And this is that balance of incentivizing density, but also getting water-wise design.
Yeah, I
Taking
kind of
out
like the
turf.
idea that it triggers it.
But it also adds cost.
Yeah, I was gonna say this.
And so, again, I'm kind of on the fence on it.
I think we should have a minimum size ADU that doesn't trigger much. Then when you start making more grandiose ADUs, larger footprints, bigger presence, however taller, however, you need to think through
More square
that.
footage.
I want to make an entry level ADU affordable, period.
I think that's a
And
fair
I'm not sure how to get there.
delineation.
Yeah.
And then as they make them more grandiose,
Mhm.
then it can trigger. But I think it's critical that we keep an entry level.
So if I'm hearing that correctly, we have elsewhere in the code incentives. You can do this if you do this. And what we really wanted to get in there, and the whole concept of floating this is, water wise is a huge thing. The landscape code, I think, is a good move in that direction. And so somehow using that allowance, right? Hey, if you want to go bigger, go something, you have to do this.
It also allows us to bring it back around on the landscape because we have no enforcement.
Right.
Like you put your things in maybe when you build.
Yeah.
And then they can all die off or you can cut them down and that's that.
Right.
And like, as a matter of fact, I wanted to mention over at Wetterhorn, hopefully they haven't gotten their final in their landscaping because a bunch of trees they put in are already dead.
Well, they haven't put, besides the trees that haven't done much of the landscaping.
Okay, but yeah, a few of the trees over there are already dead and
Or eaten by the wildlife.
That's what it was.
What about asking for, maybe not requiring, but asking whatever the word wants to be, the landscaping requirement is based on the size, because a smaller unit doesn't have a big visual impact, so maybe they only have to do X% of the landscaping. But as the unit gets bigger or taller, which is a much greater visual impact, then they have to do more of the landscaping requirements.
we just said that.
I think you just, if it's a 2-story ADU as opposed to a 1-story. So, I mean, I think we can figure this out.
Yeah, I guess the only path I would caution to go down is the sliding scale implementation of the landscaping regs.
It either triggers it or it
Yeah,
doesn't.
or we set up new regs for ADUs, we want to do that either. But well received, good conversation.
They do fee in lieu of landscaping so they can landscape the park.
Well, I mean, we are,
Landscape.
I mean, a turf replacement program, right? There's a lot of options out there if we moved in that direction too.
I think that's taking the fee in lieu, especially with certain use. I think that's
Yeah.
going too
I
far.
just want to make the ADUs as little.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said
Yep.
there
You
needs
hit
to
it,
be
you got it.
Entry level.
Yeah.
an entry level one
Yeah.
that
We're in
is,
agreement.
and I think what we need to talk about is what the square footage is of that. But something that's just really gonna be, and that's where we get into, let's have some plans, let's have some cookie cutter plans that people can, they don't even have to pay for them, the town subsidizes them. And then, you know, based on sort of standard garage sizes and things like that.
I think what's up next, isn't that the next?
So before we kind of move to that though, just kind of wrapping up this little bit of conversation and hearing loud and clear, is we'll develop what we'll do in this next concept is say, here's the minimum and is, and then kind of set incentives. You can go higher, you can go larger, you can have whatever it is. So we'll kind of frame it in that, I can see that structure. Allow very simple, easy access in. But if you want a second, you have to do this, whatever it is, right?
But we need to maintain that the incentive is to do the basic.
Correct.
Basic.
Yep, very, very easy entry. Well, I'll say because we've talked about it, like, well, shoot, we can't really incentivize it. Right now, you allow it just about anywhere. Right, so you have a very, very lax code right now for this, which I think is good. And so that's what I think we want to do, we want to continue that, but incentivize
I can
some different things, and I think those other things are sustainable design or construction practices, landscaping improvements, affordability, potentially second, right? Those are almost the 4 things maybe that we want to incentivize.
In order to build bigger.
Right. Because right now, you already gave all the carrots away.
Yeah.
If you will.
And that would, just to quickly touch on it, the thing we talked about when we created our being an ADU, or the program we created coming out of one of the workshops we went to, we realized that we had this great program that the public didn't necessarily know about. And so we need to keep educating the public about how great our options are for doing a basic ADU. Because I think a lot of people, especially newcomers, aren't going to even know that it's an option. So that's
I think we should
education.
have an ADU seminar. We could, once we get this all worked out, we could host an ADU seminar.
And just a repeatable
Yeah.
one pager that we can keep sharing.
Handout, yeah, that's a great idea. TJ, you said that we're pretty lax on our ADU requirements now, and I'm a little confused by your statement. So we allow them in residential zone, is that what you're saying? But
On almost
most of our densities in PUDs in Solar Ranch and River Park and Parkside. So they're not allowed. So Solar Ranch is about 100 units, River Park's 92 units, Parkside's 20.
Parkside added ADUs.
Yeah, but so
What I mean by it's very easy based on the town code only, right? Decks, flat notes aside, to put an ADU.
Yeah, to kind of reiterate, like from the best practices discussion, like many best practices that were reviewed. Y'all have implemented, so we're gonna talk more about ownership later, but having the owner only be in one of the units, a lot of communities require it for both. So that's I think what TJ is also getting at, but I also agree with the ADU code as it is pretty good compared to most others that could be more restricted. That are more restricted at this time.
we like ADU.
I like them too.
And driving around now, they're everywhere, right? So
Yeah,
it is working.
Yeah, before this I had opportunity.
I was like, there's one, there's.
Next. So this is a discussion about. This is a discussion about basing the measurement of an ADU and understanding what that square footage is gonna be. So introducing habitable floor area. This is that discussion we had last time about measuring to interior walls as opposed to exterior walls. Introducing a new definition is likely a good route to go because of what gross floor area might mean in other communities, or what IBC might say, for example. Talking about boosting the maximum permitted square footage, again, based on some of those incentives. And then the idea here, as an alternative to some of that, is allowing you to increase your square footage when you provide additional bedrooms, right? So right now, your limit is 800 square feet maximum for an ADU. I think the attachment that you have increases that a little bit, and then saying that if you want to go above 1,250 square feet, you can do that, but you have to have a second bedroom in there, right? As the idea there to provide more space for families and people. But then also if you want to increase the square footage instead, doing those things we talked about already, doing sustainable construction methods or making it affordable, although I don't see that as good carry.
So habitable floor area does not count exterior walls, but it does count interior walls.
I think as written in your attachment, it includes your interior walls.
It's too hard to subtract the interior.
I agree. I asked them if we're setting ourselves up with excluding exterior and if we should just increase the allowable square footage and count it from the outside because it's a lot easier.
Yeah,
If that's setting up our planning department to have to figure out the inside. Like I just sat down with my plans tonight of my house that I'm living in and I'm like, huh. And it took a while. I figured it out, but I was like, it's super easy to figure out the outside.
Yeah.
The inside's a little bit
Takes a little.
trickier. So that I give that to you guys as the planners who have to look at that and figure it out.
I think I'm concerned about the word habitable because if a ceiling height is at 7 feet or below, it's not considered habitable. So we need to put that into the equation. So when these are gonna be sloped roofs and above garages, so by building code below 7 feet, it's not considered habitable, but you can have a closet there. And so we need to think that.
I liked the gross floor area and if we can just define it. I mean, it made sense. It's been in the town for a while. It made sense. Gross floor area.
I like your idea. I like that idea. Make it simple.
I'm good with habitable.
If it's a building code thing, we'll wanna change it. We can come, I guess, we didn't think too much about the term itself, just the concept. If you remember looking through the, so one, I think what we're really looking at here is gonna be remodels. So people who are doing something to their home, that would trigger this or want to, come in and do a building permit, they'd probably most likely have the interior numbers.
It's real easy on CAD. If you can, you click CAD and you got it. But you have to do it manually and stuff.
Yeah, so that's kind of my. So I think like, what are you doing anyway with what you're trying to accomplish? And let's try to keep that as simple as possible, right? I think you're gonna be doing building, you're gonna be getting lumber, you're gonna need to measure how many linear feet of 2x4s do I need. So I don't necessarily think that it's all that difficult. Potentially, I might be missing something. I'm thinking it's a remodel, interior remodel, that's gonna be the big one. Or if it's new construction, it's all there anyway.
It's an existing ADU and they don't have the plans left for it anymore. And now they want to build the main house. You're gonna go there and measure it?
It may not get boxes there.
What's the question? Sorry.
Because you're gonna build a main house, you have to make sure that qualifies as an ADU.
I would suspect that there's building plans at the town.
Okay.
I think worst case.
I'm okay with it. You're the ones that are gonna
Yeah,
have to figure it out. If you're good with it, great, let's go.
I was just gonna mention, one of the tricky things that I think has affected people negatively in the past is that the stairwells have been included. Like if you build one on top of a garage, the stairwell gets included in habitable space, and that doesn't seem fair.
It shouldn't be,
It
right, and
shouldn't.
I was gonna say, remember when we looked at firehouse condo? How those were there were common areas. That's what I'm envisioning, something like that, where the common areas don't count towards the habitable space.
I was told that it
Right?
counted if it was inside, it didn't count if you put it outside.
But that's not right.
And then they were counting it twice because it goes it takes up 2 floors. You got an empty
Well,
space
if it's, yeah, I
upstairs.
mean, if it's inside and I'm looking at a 2-story
Yeah,
structure, yeah, it's part of my habitable space. But if it's the entrance to my unit, it's not part of my unit. Right, so the
So it
stairs,
just depends on whether there's a door at the top of the stairs or not. It shouldn't. be,
Yeah,
oh, I don't think
In
so.
my mind.
Right, I think it's from habitable space to habitable space that we count.
How about from garage to ADU above the garage?
That's the question in my mind. The example that
Yeah,
I keep hitting on is a garage where you go inside and you go upstairs to the ADU above the garage. Those stairs should not count against the square footage of the
yeah.
unit.
I agree 100%.
but if you
I-
come in a place and have an entryway and go up the stairs, then it counts.
No, it should
No.
not.
No, but if I go into my unit and then I go upstairs from the living room upstairs to my bedroom, that counts.
Yeah, if there's actual living space downstairs, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a garage and all you're doing is
But if
walking into a foyer,
it's not a garage, if you walk into like an entrance,
like a foyer kind of.
yeah,
mud
like a
room.
mudroom,
But
and then you go up the stairs. Now it's getting, just pointing out that you get into some gray areas.
If it's just a mudroom, it's not livable space in my mind.
It counts, the town counts it as livable space.
But that's what I'm saying, is they should. We shouldn't.
The town's gonna count it if it's heated, if it's heated, it's counted, living,
Garages are heated.
right? So,
I just
Okay,
say
well,
these
that-
are really great.
You're hearing a challenge.
we need to look at that.
Moving,
Wait, where are we then with the definition? Can we keep gross floor space and define it? We can't.
No. Gross floor space has a different use in the code in different places.
Different definition.
So we're gonna create something different that,
I think livable space, I like that term.
Well, habitable floor space works best, I think, because it would, to your stairwell, example, it would not count the stairwell.
Right.
As, because it's not floor space, it's stairs. So, I think that's a good.
Yeah.
It's a good term.
My only
concern would be that if it's already used in the building code.
my concern about that term is the 7-foot height.
Right, and
and there's definitely other spots in IBC where habitable could
Yeah.
throw this for a loop, so
I
definitely.
mean, in an ADU, the space below 7 feet is very valuable for a lot of different things, closets, kitchens, you know, you can have, your head doesn't hit above a kitchen, you know, so that we need to maximize the ability to use the space.
right. Hearing it.
All right, we're talking about ADU plans already, so this is a good move. So this concept is to introduce an option for the town to provide an applicant with a pre-approved ADU plan upon request. I'd like to quickly note that the three options I put in the draft are not based on existing ADU code pre-approved plans in other communities. That was just simply to state that there needs to be parameters based on each of these plans, what to be provided. But the concept of a pre-approved ADU plan, when we're talking about cost savings, is one of the stronger ones. We're talking about taking out design fees that can get up $30,000 to design these things, right? So, and then also as part of that ADU pre-approved plan, you know, you can talk about reducing the plan review fees, right? Because it's a much easier review because we know what it's gonna look like. And, you know, still requiring a building permit, but requiring it to be approved and making sure the applicant shows how the pre-approved design is fitting onto their lot. That's important still. But then deciding on what those pre-approved plans are based on, are they based on square footage, bedrooms? But basically, you know, what is the market like about those sizes and what the difference in the plans should be? And to, you know, also point out this would require RFP, you know, getting a bid off from architects.
How are we ever gonna agree on that?
I guess the question I have for you is who are we aiming this toward? A pre-approved plan.
Trying to make it affordable,
Pardon?
trying to make it affordable. More affordable, so we're aiming it at the low-end homeowner that wants to put in an ADU at minimum cost.
Well, what about, rather than going, because I assume we would have, the town would have to hire an architect to do these. And then how does that fit into a disparate or group of architectural styles? We're gonna put cookie cutters behind the same cookie cutter behind a Victorian.
But then we just have-
That were.
That's just the fenestration, that they would be cookie cutter floor plans. So that the actual, how you want to do your siding and your, you know, bay windows and stuff like that, your, you know.
It would just be a floor plan, wouldn't be an elevation.
Well, but if we're just going for affordability, what about just suggesting that the people that made
Fading
letter.
west, it's fading west.
Yeah. Because
That's one option, that's
That's
one option.
no, you know, that's no cost to us.
But that's not always gonna work for people. That should definitely be an option. That should definitely be one of the options, but that. We can't say that even fading west is for a number of reasons that would be the one way to make it affordable. And another thing we talked about in terms of the architect is we actually talked at one point about having a competition amongst regional architects and say compete to provide us with say 3 cookie cutter ADU plans, and you get some PR, you get your name mentioned every time somebody uses one of these things.
The other thing that I had thought of as well is we have several in town that have already been approved. If we could provide some incentive or perhaps a small fee, those people, you know, give them a reason to want to turn over those plans, but I mean, they've already paid for them, what are they gonna do with them now? If they're
And-
there, why not share them with the town?
A similar option could be list some builders in Colorado who have models that we know meet our requirements. And just say, here's some links to some builders that you might want to get hold of that have plans that meet our requirements.
Food for thought.
And and it might not be an option of like having 3, large ADU plans. It could just be one pre-approved plan that's very small square footage to very much fit, someone in the door of an ADU, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a multi-tier or anything like that. It could just be one very small plan that's intended for, meeting almost every dimensional standard. It's so small that it's easy to do, right?
Yeah.
So that could also be that way.
That'd be a great starting point, and then as we grow the program, we can add things like what Russ is suggesting. Have fading west be referenced, that all makes sense as we go down the road.
Yeah, and so just to kind of go back to some of the benefits of this, or at least some of the concepts, are one, because again, all the options we talk about are not, they're all on the table, right? You can do that right now. What I think we're trying to do is say, these are approved by the town, they come to the town and get the plans. And the incentive there really is that there's no plan review fee, which is half the cost.
Still have to review the site plan.
Correct. So there's still a building, there's still the permit fee.
They're still gonna have to create a site plan and hire somebody.
Correct.
Still
Yep.
needs to be engineered too, right, based on the site.
So you need to do a foundation.
Yeah,
Yep. So.
we could have a
but-
pre-approved foot foundation plan, you could.
You still have to do dirt
Well,
tests.
you still have to.
Various enough around town, not all of
Yeah,
them.
so what we're trying to do though, right, the whole point of this, where I'm going, is that we're trying to cut out as many of the costs from the town side as we can. And when we don't have, right, if we say, hey, go to this architect, I'm not picking on you, Pam. If go to this architect, they have plans, we don't know what's coming in, even if we know that they do good plans. We'd still have to review that plan, and that plan fee would still apply. Right, so I want to be clear that the point of this pre-approved plan is that we've already done the pre-plan review. And we've saved it.
I think we start off simple with like 1 or 2 and then see how that goes.
Yes.
Well, and having more than one, my comment was gonna be having more than one, is a little more enticing than just having one plan.
Mhm.
Sure.
May not fit the mold of what you're looking to achieve, and having it codified is going a step further.
But I want to add something here. We said earlier something about if it's a 1,200 square foot ADU, it should be 2 bedrooms. I think we should, I don't know if we should require, but I think we should incentivize that anything under between 800 and 1,000 feet should probably be 2 bedrooms. 1,200 should be 3 bedrooms or a 2-bedroom den. So I think you can fit a nice 3-bedroom house, 3-bedroom apartment in 1,200 square feet, if you're good, with a nice kitchen. So I think having a 1-bedroom, 1,200 square foot ADU is luxurious to me.
Yeah.
So I think we need to look at, I would like to incentivize more bedrooms in our plan, and so I wanted to bring that up.
Because, that is density,
800 square foot 1 bedroom is a good size 1 bedroom. I've seen 800 square foot 2 bedrooms done by guys who know what, like apartment designers and know what they're doing. 2-bedroom, 2 bath, 800 square feet.
Whoa,
Well,
that's
Yeah.
tight.
Yeah,
I'll stop for what Max and TJ have proposed. I think they hit that mark a little bit, maybe subject to modification. 500 square feet, 1 bedroom, 750 square feet, 2 bedroom, 1,000 square feet, 3 bedroom.
it's a little light. I mean, I think we need to add a couple, I think those need to slide up, but we need to look at that size, I think. We need to incentivize more bedrooms somehow. I think 500 square foot, 1 bedroom, you can do, but 700 square foot, 2 bedrooms, tough. 800 square foot, 2 bedrooms, tough. 900 is easier, but we need to look at that. We might need to get some professional help.
We all need professional.
So I guess a couple of thoughts. One, yes, right, what we're suggesting is going to architects and saying, design something. Two, but for that, I'm not sure we want to get into the regulating bedroom.
I want to incentivize.
But how, why?
I'm not sure.
For density.
I want families to be able to live in an ADU. I want married couples with kids. I mean, that's the way I'm thinking about it.
I think what he's saying, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, that's the way I'm not sure it's the correct way I think, but that's what's in my head. I mean, the people who, and I'm not sure this is politically correct, but the people who work in the community have husbands and wives and kids.
Not everybody.
No, but they should be able to.
We want
School
to
teachers.
address all the needs, right?
We want to have it, don't have to have everyone that way, but we need to have those options available. I think a 1 bedroom, 1,200 square foot ADU is ridiculous.
Forgive me, but I think what I'm hearing TJ say is that this gets back to what you were saying about parking. Let the market decide, let the homeowner decide. Give them the square footage.
I think we want, I get the incentive thing, but I don't know how much we want to regulate.
So
You guys probably.
I'll throw another concept out there that we noodled on. I don't think it's anywhere in here.
Noodlers.
Is this concept of an accommodation unit. It's almost the old school like lock off. It has a different definition than a dwelling unit. I also just was working through the definition of a dormitory type thing. And again, I'm not necessarily suggesting this, but we have different terms for different types of units. Where a dormitory is it's almost your point, Jack. It says it's a common area a minimum common area per bedroom. So
that's a fantastic.
That's an interesting concept, right? I don't know that it necessarily plays in here, but there's a lot of opportunities. The other is accommodation units that says it's almost a hotel room.
It all depends on whether it's got kitchenette,
So bath,
refrigerator.
kitchen, or
So those are things, obviously, we don't necessarily want an accommodation unit for long term, right? There are things in that will not be used for long term. But it also hits potentially another price point. The other concept to think about is the use of the ADUs. Who's going to be using that? I'm kind of jumping ahead, I think, to the next one. Is the next one ownership?
Nope.
Okay. Well, remind me later to talk about the ownership. I won't get into it now.
Well, I think if we don't short-term rent them, I mean, I think it takes that pressure off. If we short-term rent these ADUs, if we allow short-term rent, adamantly opposed to it. It changes it, the whole dynamic.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. I think what I'd really like to see come out of this is that and you can't use the phrase ADU and short-term together. There's no way for an ADU to be short-term rented.
No matter who's living there.
Short-term rental, you gotta go a whole different route. You've gotta build a conventional home and it has to have a separate water and sewer tap and the whole freaking 9 yards. But ADUs in no way can ever be short-term rented. Are we in agreement about that?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go on record here because I can't help myself. The town of Dallas, Texas, which is about 1.3 million, outlawed all short-term rentals in any residential zone in the city. Any residential zone in the city. That's Dallas, Texas. Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah, I'm and deferring to what I've heard. I like the idea of number of bedrooms per square footage. Because it keeps it as a home, which I've heard in several people. We're trying to create homes, even if they're small and compact. I just downsized to a condo, 850 square feet, 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And it's perfectly comfortable. So, you know, the hotel room or the kitchenette does not create a home feeling for people that when we're trying to provide workforce housing, it makes it feel temporary.
Pam, can I ask you a question? When you say that, are you advocating for actually regulating the number of bedrooms per specific square footages or just encouraging them?
I would like to regulate them.
You would, okay. I think you're hearing most of the rest of us are not
No.
very comfortable with actually regulating that.
I have an example.
But we can talk more about it. And I throw that back
And
to
I'm just,
the new.
yeah, it's just part of the conversation.
Yep, exactly.
I think we want to check out precedents too. I guess a question I would ask is, I guess.
Might not even be legal.
That, yeah.
There is.
Like in the IRC, if I own a parcel and I want to build a 2,500 square foot home, just an example, and I only want 1 bedroom in that, which sounds silly.
Happens.
Is there anything to preclude? I don't think there is.
No, I don't.
Building code requires a minimum square footage for a bedroom.
But not a maximum.
There are 2,500 square foot 1-bedroom homes, trust me.
Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, and I built an ADU to live in. I don't ever plan on moving out of it. If I ever built a main house, I would rent it long term. But I don't want to be told how many bedrooms that I have to put it. That's my home. That's where I'm living. So I don't think it should be regulated. I think we can incentivize it, we can suggest, but I don't want to be that rigid in Ridgway.
I think incentivizing bedrooms is a good idea. I'm not sure how to do it.
Rigid in Ridgway? Sounds good. I didn't even mean
So.
Okay, next.
I'm good with incentives, strong ones. Yeah.
Good.
We can go through this one real quick because we've talked about all this at some point. But the next idea here is simply providing motivation or increasing density when the applicant can provide income restricted units or certified sustainable construction. Just to give a little bit of meat to that affordability aspect of it. We envisioned probably setting that cap at 120% of AMIs to still consider it affordable. Based on what you need to do to get density or square footage, and then also recording that covenant that runs with the property to ensure that the ADU remains affordable forever or 25 years or whatever it might be. But the idea is yes, keep it affordable for a long time. And then like we've talked about, having some organizations, not that we know what they are now, but providing the idea that if you want to increase your square footage or increase your density, you have to make sure that that construction is certified by an important organization. If you had it, I guess. But we talked about this before, so if you had any other comments about the provision or sustainable construction.
I look forward to seeing this all organized so that it all makes sense, because it's a lot of if then,
Yeah, and I understand it's easy to get your wires crossed when you have just a bunch of concepts that don't necessarily run together. Yeah.
I'm concerned that, and I'm not an expert, I think probably Preston and John are better at this. I would want to make the 125% flexible. So that it could, if we needed to go up and down, however we would go. I mean, we've seen people at 120% of AMI can't afford to live here. So does that really need to be 130 or 150? I don't know the answer to that. I think it needs to be movable.
Yeah.
Somehow. We're so expensive. 100% of AMI in this town is unrealistic.
Yeah, there are a bunch of places where 200% of AMI.
Yeah, so we need to look at that or make a provision that we can slide that.
I think, because with this, one of the projects we're doing here is the affordable housing section. So really what we do is just slide reference that, right? If you meet the affordable housing stuff in that section,
That's good, because
That's
then
it,
that's
right?
one
So
thing
it's
that
only
gets
gonna be in one
examined.
spot.
Mhm.
I have a question.
When it was.
in-
But everybody, that's a number everybody throws around, but I'm saying I think it's unrealistic.
Go ahead, Pam.
I'm just asking if Max or TJ has an example. LEED is so incredibly expensive to build. What kind of motivation are you thinking of or have you heard of elsewhere?
So, LEED is, we kind of talked about that, LEED is an expensive certification process, but the intent would be to, allow for either increased square footage, so if you wanted to build greater than 1,250 square feet, then it has to be a certified LEED structure, for example, not specifically LEED, but from a certified organization. Or increasing density, again, probably not the right route for that either, but the intent is, that an organization that has credibility can provide a certification to the ADU, and as a result, you get a boost to your square footage.
So like SIPs construction?
No, it would be more like, potentially a passive design. Passive that service has.
I think it could be energy related. And I think it should be tied to density. I think it's 100% should be.
So
tied to
non-SIPs.
No, SIPS is really a construction technique,
Yes,
it's just a certification, so.
It's like the material. It's a material used in building the shell of your home.
Right.
To get a
That's
LEED
right.
certification, you have to have, you could have LEEDs, I mean, you could have SIPS walls, but then all your windows would have to be a certain R rating and your roof would have to, all the whole package of things that LEEDs requires is what's expensive.
Okay.
All the
And
different-
And there are different levels of LEED.
Yeah, there's
It's higher
silver
than
and
what the
gold.
town requires.
It leads to your point to put your sheet rock in your garden.
I just found a website that lists a bunch of other certifications that are alternates to points.
Yeah, it's important to understand, which ones are, valuable to the town.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You guys.
Okay. All right, so you're talking about reducing feasibility, putting money back in your bank so that you can, not break the bank so that you can build this ADU. Some of the examples for reducing plan fees would be for, is it detached or attached? For example, an attached ADU or even garage conversion is easier to review. So further reducing those fees based on what the construction type is, based on, how easy it is to review and approve. Reducing plan review fees for income restricted units, reducing a plan fee for anyone who's committing to doing those alternative construction methods. That could be a little expensive. So finding that, balance there. But this is just summarizing ways that we've talked about reducing fees already. So I could give you feedback on, where else we could be reducing fees, but these are the first ones that came to mind for sure.
How about interest rates? Can you lower those?
It's
It's really expensive, no matter how you dice it, to build an ADU right now.
Well, I think what the town has always done is reduce tap fees. And then we're not speaking about that. I guess
Yes,
that's a general fee category, but that's what we've been doing for many years.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how effective it's been,
Well,
but it's what we've done.
If you attach to the existing taps on the house, then you don't have to pay tap fees for
I think
any.
that's correct.
Yes, it is.
It is.
Yes, it is.
It's served off the line that
Thanks.
serves the primary residence.
Yeah. No tap fees.
That's the big incentive that we first did to create ADUs. Before we had ADUs, you had to buy a separate water and sewer tap to build another unit on your property. And we said, no, we're gonna let you use the same water and sewer tap, not pay a fee and build an ADU. And that was transformational back then.
I thought that built an ADU, you had to pay a percentage of that tap. Is that?
No, you have to pay a
that's
percentage
on
of the
short-term
water and the sewer bill, not the tap fee.
And you only have to pay a percentage of the water and sewer taps if you go short-term rent.
I got it. I'm sorry, I got it.
It's like a 30% impact.
I think even if you long,
Down low.
no, even if you long-term rent it,
If it's not an ADU.
yeah,
No.
yeah.
No.
Yeah,
No.
I know someone that is paying extra because of it.
They're paying extra water and sewer per month, but not at 30% of their tap fees. You pay
Yes,
30% of the
yes,
tap fees. and
yes,
turn it into.
but you pay a percentage extra on your usage.
Yes, you do. I do as well.
Mhm.
Sorry, we're getting in the weeds.
No worries. This is a concept that's not groundbreaking, but very common, but I think would be important for ADU construction. We were thinking about a requirement for the applicant to notify your neighbors when your ADU is gonna be constructed. That notification would be just to your adjacent neighbors along the property lines, not within a certain distance. Require this prior to receiving a building permit, so that town knows that you've talked to your neighbors about this, and this kind of helps get ahead of, you know, property line disputes, for example. And also giving the adjacent property owners some peace of mind when they're given the timeline of construction, the potential impact to their property, and the contact information for the builder that's gonna be on site. This is mostly just to kind of get ahead of some of those concerns that neighbors would have, but in this case, we're codifying that you talk to your neighbors as part of this process.
Well, if we're hanging on to setbacks, I don't see the value of this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, granted, if we were going to move those dimensional standards and expand those, I can see it, I can see that, but I don't want my neighbors telling me, you know, hey, I don't like that. You know, I have every right to build it if I observe zoning standards. But coming from where we started with the reduced setbacks, etc., I can see the value of this. I can't as it is. I don't know, maybe somebody.
I agree with Bill. I think if you require you to talk to the neighbors before you issue the permit, I think that should be required if you're looking for a variance or a change in setbacks. But if it's already a use for price,
right?
because what the neighbor's gonna say, oh, I need to get a survey, or oh, you're changing my view, I'm gonna go talk to Preston. You know, and so I think you open a can of worms that you don't need to open. If they're asking for a change in setback or change in use or whatever change they might ask,
Yeah,
I agree.
Sorry, what's your guys' thought behind this?
Well, it kind of looks to your point, which was that we were reducing the setback so much, increasing building coverage. The thought there was that might be something you want to talk to.
If he wants to change the site setback or the building coverage, then we should talk to his neighbor.
Yeah.
I have a question. I don't think we would require this for a normal home, but any type of survey, like when we talk about property boundaries, you know, some of them in town are marked, but I didn't find where anybody, when I was building my house, like checked if I had the proper setbacks, like when the foundation went in and things like that. I'm surprised we don't check that when someone's building.
It's
To make
checked on
sure
site
that-
plan, you get a building permit, it's checked. The building inspector should check.
And then theoretically, the building inspector inspects the forming of the foundation and comes and
I think it was checked.
looks at where your property line is, and if your property line isn't marked, if there are no pins, then.
Oh, my God.
Then at that point, they might ask for a survey, right?
Yeah,
And often a survey's requested or required on a property sale.
No sign.
Or for financing.
No, they usually get what they call improvement location certificates,
Yeah.
which are not a survey. So that's a public misunderstanding. Improvement location is not a survey, just locates the improvement.
It's interesting, or it's a good point in a town like Ridgway where there aren't many pins. Actual property.
It just seems pretty important and it gets overlooked, and I've had this conversation with TJ outside of the meeting. The other thing is elevations, the elevation at which you start to build your house. Great example over on Charles Street, that barn dominium that got built more pretty recently in the middle of the block between Mary and Laura on the south side. It's a 1-story, built really high, super steep driveway. Like someone missed it. It didn't need to be that high, and it's not something that anybody seems to be responsible for.
The brand new one that's on the highway?
No,
No,
it's
no,
Charles.
on the north side of town, it's
You know what you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, everybody.
Horrible, it's too high. And
I
then like,
bet it's not more than 27 feet.
What do you mean? It's.
no, the base of it is too high, like the driveway is super steep. Going to the house,
That's
like it
the
doesn't,
property owner's decision. If they want to see-
There's also a ditch in the front yard, but that's their problem.
It's, you could build a driveway like this if you wanted it, the town.
In the county, you have a grade requirement, and not necessarily
We don't have-
in the county, we do. In the county,
Well, that's because you have longer driveways, but
we have steep, yeah.
we don't have any requirement for the driveway steepness.
I just think that's a
People-
perfect example.
People make interesting choices.
Yeah, when it's not long, someone else lives with that choice.
Oh, this is so
They don't have to
entertaining.
mind if they don't want to.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Moving on. Alright, so this actually comes back to the whole conversation about the tap fees, but, so here's another concept about opening up alternative ownership pathways. The idea here is to allow an ADU to be split off of the lot from the principal structure. And provide that pathway utilizing current subdivision regulations. We have the building footprint, condominium, and townhouse subdivision process that could be utilized to separate the ADU from the lot. Something that could give me a stomach ache would be talking about, you know, connecting that sewer and water, right? We talked about tap fees before. That's one thing we'd have to very much talk about in terms of this concept as well. The idea here being also that this opens up the opportunity for families who want to provide or have another income method for their property that they've decided they want to split off their lot, build a home, they might already have that opportunity available to them. And of course, the split off property would still need to be compliant with the dimensional standards and those types of requirements such as building coverage, so those still need to be abided by, they still need to connect to public water and sewer. They could have a reduced fee from that, you know, from those tap fees, for example, but the idea here is that there's a subdivision pathway for a homeowner to decide to split off their ADU.
And both lots wouldn't need primary street access?
That's my concern is access.
Yes.
The access is the biggest deal there.
Well, and street.
That's what
front,
it is currently, that's
Yeah.
the catch.
because so many ADUs are going to be alley.
Subdivide both.
Once, where does that leave us with those?
So they just did this in Montrose where they have a downtown overlay district where you can break off an ADU and sell it with alley access.
Oh,
So that's what we're talking
oh
about.
man, we were thinking we were so unique on this.
Yeah, so that's what,
Montrose?
I think the access is the big issue.
Do they pick up trash on the alleys and, no, they do.
Yeah, it's called the Montrose overlay or the Old Town overlay district or something like that.
I don't see why we would, it seems to me the only way I would be okay with this is if, yes, we require a separate water and sewer tap. And I cannot see why we would reduce the fee. It's like it becomes another home. It's,
Yeah.
you know, the whole idea of an ADU is that we're giving this huge incentive of not having to get another water and sewer tap to put it in. Why would we then allow you to take that same ADU and turn it into a separate saleable property and not charge the full water and sewer tap fee?
And not charge the full building.
And then it can be an STR, it can, you know, it's just another home, it can be
Yeah.
treated with all.
Lays us open to speculation.
Yeah,
I
I don't
think-
like that at all.
He's on it. If we do that, then all the fees have to be water tap, building code, all that stuff has to be brought, as if it was a separate rental, separate unit and not just an ADU. All the ADU for bands has to be.
So if we were gonna do that, it seems the way that you go about it is take it out of the ADU section and change our subdivision rules that allow alley access.
Right, both.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with this.
Yeah, I don't, it's a tough one.
You know, we talked last week, the three of us, Preston, Max and I. This is one that I think all three of us like. I can't see this working. I don't see a path for this, but let's go ahead.
It's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But we already got the.
Now, the only, I will say this, the thing that does, you know, just a couple of other thoughts, right, as we're thinking over the next few weeks. One, this is kind of another notch in the con, but potentially a way to make it happen. is that there are standard declarations, right? So it's not totally, it's land that's disconnected, but it's connected through some type of an ownership or agreement type thing. There's deed restriction on it that it's only for a certain size and it can't be more, right? So to make sure that it stays as it is. Now, these have a ton of issues in of themselves. The real benefit, I think, at least it was like, this is probably, and this is what I was gonna say earlier, is that the benefit of ownership is that it gets you into the market. So the concept here, which would be even harder to do, but this is where some affordable housing projects and workforce housing projects go with their deed restriction, is that they limit the amount of time that somebody can live in that unit. So if it were, you got a newlyweds, say, right? A couple that just moved down and they want to have a home, starter home. They buy this, they live there for 3 years, now they start having family and they move up. So that, I just want to throw that out there. I think the only real beneficial concept here is that it's a great way to get into the ownership, but it comes with a lot of other stuff. So I'll just throw that out there.
And I'll just offer, this is an opinion, the only way I'd be comfortable with that is if, like in this scenario, it is split off, the service line extending from the primary dwelling unit to the ADU, service lines rather, be completely abandoned.
Yep.
You have to pay that new system investment fee, better known as the TAP fee, which in my mind is always an invisible fee just to get into our system. And then you have to pay for the installation of the service lines as well.
I like this idea. I don't think we're ready for it.
Yeah.
Let's do it a couple of years.
Montrose did it.
Yeah, but Montrose would have a different.
Our alleys are pretty fun.
Yeah, I think their alleys are bigger. It's a different layout.
I'm curious if they're alleys are.
I think, well, I don't know, they seem, they feel different. I don't know.
I would also like to use this slide to talk about short-term rentals a little bit too. One of the things we struck out was removing that lot size requirement for STRs, we talked about earlier, it's 6,000 square feet. And then also thinking about the lease period, the requirement for AD right now is that in order for it to be short-term rental, it has to have 90 days to a minimum lease period of 90 days, unless it's an STR, is it? Yeah, so it's 90 days. If it's not an AD, or not a short-term rental.
No, I don't think that's in there now. We were proposing that.
You know, it's 31.
Right. I think what we were saying is that it could be used for some, like a seasonal kind of thing.
But again, I think there's consensus here that we don't want the words, the terms ADU and STR to be ever spoken together again in this town.
Yeah.
So we can go ahead and strike that next.
What did you say about square footage up front? I'm sorry, I missed that. The first thing you said about removing the square footage sign.
Yeah, so STRs require a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet
Right now.
right now. And one of the updates we considered was just striking that out, but it sounds like we're gonna remove the STR section as a whole.
Yeah, and I can tell you that the reason it says that now is because what I was trying to, I should say, we're trying to accomplish back then was to say that the only way you could short-term rent is if your property actually already qualified for a second unit without it having to be an ADU.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay,
That makes sense.
that's where that came from.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
The only way you could use an ADU as an STR is if the property upon which the ADU and the primary structure sit qualifies to have a second unit on it, even as with a whole separate water and sewer tap in terms of square footage.
Well, I have I have a short-term rental license that I've been used in years, but I'm not feeling good about short-term rentals anymore. So I need to say that.
You're not supposed to still have it if you haven't used
Should
it.
I buy it?
No, I pay for it.
I know, but I think we
Okay.
did we push through a thing where if you're not using it, it
Expires.
No.
No, we talked about that.
We did that with the pawn shop license.
Okay. Hot jobs, STR.
If you do that, I'll pay for it. Yeah, if you use it, if you do that, I'll just use it.
You're saying you STRs
It's a lot of fun.
I have a lot of experience with them and.
Any questions?
No,
Questions?
That was great.
Discussion?
no, we're good.
Nice job.
Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah.
I think we've given you plenty of direction.
Yeah, I think obviously we'll keep noodling, but I think this one, we're certainly gonna come back with another, refine some of these concepts, that this has been great. We whittled it down. I mean, John, how do you feel? Because you've been in the ADU thing for so long. Are we moving in that right direction?
I think so. I'm still
Pushing it?
gonna be really
Yeah.
interested to see. It seems like you guys are really interested in this thing. And I can see where that could be pretty cool in some places, but I see huge potential unintended consequences. Cause we heard a lot when we basically doubled our density by reducing it to 25-foot frontage. That, oh my God, the density, town's just gonna explode with density. And I said, I don't think you're gonna see that. There's so many people that own 3 and 4 lots already. There aren't that many people that have just 1 lot or would wanna do that.
But there are people who live in an 18-foot wide house.
This 2-to-1 thing
Right.
changes that. It creates a whole different incentive that could explode in a way we might not.
So I guess the question I pose to you all, because I agree, I think that's the big change here. Are there right places for it? Is it a square footage of a lot? Is it a zone district?
I think it's like charge ratio.
Is
what I
it,
think.
you know, I'll challenge you all to think a little bit more deeply as to what specifically that issue is. Right, because it's not 3 units necessarily.
One of your examples was like a lock off in a garage apartment.
Yeah.
So
So
to me, I want to think longer and harder about the neighborhood impacts.
correct. And so, there are a lot of components to that.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of them can be written into code.
Okay.
But so maybe that's the focus of our conversation next time too.
This is exciting.
But and I'm not advocating for or against it, right? You challenge that.
I'm advocating for it.
Okay, does it make sense? So I think this gave us some good stuff. I think we can draft a lot of it. So just to make sure, we're good on STRs for short-term rentals. Or short-term rentals ADUs, right?
You think?
Right.
You think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Build more.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, actually, sorry, one other thing I forgot to mention, economies of place. So this is the land use analysis, the portfolio that we're looking at. Remember I think it was last time we talked about it, that said, hey, let's do some economics of it, right? Kind of market analysis light. And so economies of place, actually just got the email on the way down here, got GIS data from the county that has assessors data on it. So we'll start looking at values, which is great. Economies of place, a good friend of ours, Elliot Weiss, is looking at the cost per square footage, cost per linear foot. I don't know exactly what he's going to do, but start putting some numbers, values to the land uses and the zone districts, so that we can start seeing what that equates to in a marketing standpoint. We're gonna be working with Preston next week, I think, hopefully next week, week after, looking at the budget too. So looking at your costs as well as some of the market components and the assessed values. So that's what we're working through. We will have something to you for the next meeting on that as well. But I'm pretty excited where these are going, to be honest. I think we're moving ahead pretty good. I think we can move forward with the parking requirement standards pretty good next time. We'll get most of the ADU stuff here and noodle on some of the big concepts. Get some more information on the land use analysis, and I don't know if that'll be enough or not. I don't know what that'll look like. And then we still just need to work on the affordable housing
We done with this halfway through the year, we're gonna need more stuff.
Someone tells me there'll be some applications. Appreciate you guys coming all the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Good to have you.
Good to meet you, Max.
Yes, pleasure to meet you all.
Yeah,
Thanks, Max.
thanks.
Minutes,
Yeah, we need approval of last
some of,
month's minutes.
Second.
I'll move.
I did,
We're moving to lunch.
we moved and seconded already.
All those in favor,
Should we do a roll call?
Aye.
Because now, because Pam's, we need to do roll.
roll call vote.
Okay. We ready?
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Forster,
Yes, approve.
okay, Lisk,
Aye.
Meyer,
Aye.
Petroselli,
Aye.
Clark,
All right,
Montague.
Perfect.
Anything else?
thanks, everybody.
abstain.
Okay, Pam had her hand up for.
She was voting, I think.
No, I wanted to give a kudos to Preston for his presentation at the Colorado meeting last week.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for being there.
Likewise.
I think she's talking about the Colorado River District.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was there too. Thanks for doing that.
And I just want to mention that we're at the cleanup on April 20th. We're gonna have mulch, free mulch for our town residents. So you can bring your truck, buckets or shovel or whatever. You have to haul it yourself and pick up some mulch.
Right.
And please spread the word to everyone.
Spread the mulch.
Yes.
Thanks.
I laughed. I thought that was-
Thank you.
You got anything else?
Um,
Came all this way.
That was worth a
Joke something?
joke.
Who won the bet?
While they're noodling, is it going to be marinara or pasta or pesto?
Yeah.
Adjourn.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
I'll take it first night.
Thanks.